My wife said she was going to work, and I believed her, as I always had. That morning, the kiss was light, almost automatic, and she avoided my gaze for a second longer than usual. A second that today I would give anything to have paid more attention to. I didn't suspect, not at that point. But there was something inside me, an intuition that refused to die. And that day, for the first time in years, I followed her. Not out of suspicion, but out of instinct. I saw her deviate, when she didn't enter the company building, and my heart began to beat a different rhythm. Her car stopped in front of an elegant, almost secret salon, as if hiding something sordid behind its polished facade. I waited a few minutes before getting out. And what I saw inside pierced me like a sharp knife. She was there. Smiling. Laughing in a way she hadn't laughed with me in a long time. Another man's hand on her waist, dancing to the low music, accomplices in a dirty game. It was a party for couples. Couples. Not lovers, not affairs, couples. People who present themselves as a couple. People who belong together. And they were in the center, comfortable as if it were natural, as if they were two who chose each other years ago. The other guests laughed, toasted, pretended not to notice that there was a missing ring, a broken commitment, a betrayed pact. It was there, in that room full of fake smiles, that I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. The air grew heavy. The lights dimmed. The sound muffled. I watched my life fall apart without anyone around me noticing. They danced, and I died a little more with each step. I returned home without saying a word. I walked down the stairs of that hall like someone fleeing their own funeral. I sat on the sofa, looked at the photographs on the bookshelf, the made bed, her perfume still in the air. And that night I didn't cry. Or scream. I just understood. I understood that the love I gave was being wasted. That the respect I believed I had was a carefully maintained lie. The next day, I wrote a note. Short. Cruel. Real. I'm not part of this anymore. I left it on the kitchen table, folded in half. And I left. She didn't call that day. She didn't show up. She stayed with him, as if I were a closed chapter in a book she'd tired of reading. She tried to stay with her lover, thinking that momentary fire could become shelter. But fate doesn't usually reward that kind of gamble. And soon she discovered he didn't want any future at all. Just a distraction. A pastime. An easy body. A stolen trophy. He didn't choose her. He didn't even consider the possibility. He simply left. And she was left alone. Alone with the echo of her own choices. Alone with the silence she herself had built. Alone with the weight of what she had thrown away. That's when she came back. She came back with downcast eyes, a trembling voice, broken words. She wanted to talk. To say she'd made a mistake. That she understood now. That she regretted it. That she missed me. But I wasn't the same man she'd abandoned. Because amidst the chaos, the loss, the mourning of what we were, I found someone. A serene gaze. A secure embrace. A presence that didn't shout, didn't demand, didn't hurt. It was peace. And there I understood that peace is also a form of love. That love doesn't need drama to be intense. That it doesn't need risk to be true. And when she reached out to me, I heard her. Every word. Every apology. Every tear. And I forgave. Not out of weakness. But out of strength. I forgave so we could both move on. So the past wouldn't hold me back anymore. But not so we could start over. Because her love came too late. She continued with the emptiness of choices. I, with the serenity of someone who has learned to choose themselves. But what she didn't know, what no one knew, is what happened after she walked out that door, believing I had simply moved on. There's something I never told anyone. Something she will never know. Something that changed everything. Because sometimes, even after overcoming, there are still truths that burn in silence. And that's when everything changes. Welcome to the channel. Here, no form of betrayal is romanticized or condoned. All stories are fiction, but they reflect harsh truths. Betrayal destroys, corrodes, and leaves scars that not even time can erase. The objective is clear: to show how thoughtless choices can cost everything. Get ready. What you're about to hear is intense, true, and will leave you breathless. Good story. They met on a warm spring afternoon, at a simple event at the university where they both attended. There was no immediate passion or cinematic glances, but there was something there. A calm. A sense of belonging. That even without knowing much about each other, there was a space reserved in both of them for what would blossom. She was Emily, he was Daniel. Two ordinary names in an ordinary world, but together they would write a story that was anything but ordinary. At first, it was light. Coffee after classes, texts at night, laughter shared in silence in the crowded hallways. There were no promises of a future, just the constant presence of the present. And the present was enough. Time transformed the casual into something solid. They began sharing weekends, then holidays, until they were sharing the rent of a small apartment with used furniture and new plans. Together, they built a home where simplicity was the greatest luxury. The decor was made of small gestures, notes left on the table, napkins with hastily drawn designs, songs shared at the end of the day. The routine didn't weigh on them, it was celebrated. Daniel woke up early to work as a financial analyst at a company about 40 minutes from home, while Emily taught literature at a high school. Both arrived exhausted, but it was in their daily reunion that their fatigue took on meaning. The differences between them were clear, but never a problem. Emily was more sensitive, more talkative, with a constant need for expression and affection. Daniel was reserved, practical, the type who preferred to listen before speaking, but who demonstrated love in every little detail, in the way he made her breakfast, in the reminders he set on her phone to remind her to take her medication, in the way he turned off the lamp when she fell asleep reading. They didn't say, "I love you," every day, but when they did, it was because they wanted every syllable to carry weight. They weren't a perfect couple, far from it, but they worked. Or at least they seemed to. Years crept by like layers of paint on an old canvas. Bills arrived, adulthood challenges arose, and the cramped living space that sometimes felt too small for two personalities with different desires. Emily began to grow frustrated with her career stagnation. I wanted more, I sought more. She began attending courses, lectures, and evening events focused on education and culture. She thirsted for expansion, and Daniel, though proud of her, began to feel out of place. Not out of jealousy, but because he couldn't keep up with the pace of the transformations she was undergoing. He was stable, constant, yet immutable. She was movement, intensity, reinvention. And although there was still love, the noises began to be heard in the silence of increasingly shorter dinners, in the messages that were no longer spontaneous, in the touch that became habit instead of desire. But it wasn't an obvious crisis. No one cheated, no one yelled, no one hurt anyone directly. It was like a slow wear and tear, an almost invisible erosion, like a crack forming behind the paint on the walls. In the eyes of their friends, they remained the couple that worked. She posted pictures smiling alongside him, and he made a point of following her on her projects whenever he could. There was a mutual effort to maintain what they had built. And this effort was often mistaken for love. Because they still cared, they just weren't sure if in the same way anymore. The height of his emotional turmoil came when Daniel received a promotion offer that would require more time away from home. Overtime, work trips, Saturday meetings. He hesitated, but Emily encouraged him. She told him he deserved it, that she would be fine, that she could handle his absence. And indeed, she did. He occupied himself with new friendships, new ideas, new circles. There wasn't an immediate separation, but a shift in frequency. They began to live at different paces, in incompatible emotional time zones. They still shared the same roof, the same sofa, but they no longer shared the same thoughts. Emily started sleeping later, claiming she needed to study. Daniel, exhausted, slept earlier. The mornings were quick, the nights silent. And no one talked about it. There was affection, yes, but a fondness more akin to that of old friends than lovers. Emily strove to keep her social life alive, engaging in cultural projects, attending events that nourished her intellectually. Daniel, on the other hand, found comfort in the predictability of everyday life. His joys lay in the small routines, a good coffee, a Sunday basketball game, the feeling of coming home and knowing she would be there. But gradually, this return stopped bringing relief. It began to weigh on him, because Emily's presence was accompanied by a deeper absence. She was there, but her mind was elsewhere. And he knew it. He knew, but he didn't know how to ask. The marriage continued like this, a silent tightrope walk, where the two pretended not to see the abyss growing beneath their feet. Conversations became formal, kisses brief, hugs cold. When they were with friends, they looked at each other more as accomplices than as lovers. It was as if they both knew something had changed, but refused to name it. Because naming meant facing it. And facing it required courage. And perhaps neither of them was ready to dismantle the castle they had spent so long building. And then came their 5th wedding anniversary. A simple, private dinner. Daniel bought an expensive wine, cooked her favorite pasta, and set the table with flowers. She arrived later than planned, exhausted, saying she'd had a long day. They sat down, toasted, and smiled. But the silence between bites was jarring. She thanked him, telling him he was special. He smiled, but sensed something in her voice was missing. That night, they slept back to back. And in the middle of the night, when he woke, he reached out to touch her. But the bed was empty. She wasn't there. And he didn't ask the next day. That was the beginning of a succession of disguised absences. Work commitments, meetings with colleagues, last-minute meetings. Daniel continued to believe. Maybe out of love. Maybe out of fear. Emily continued to smile, but it no longer reached her eyes. And the distance, once subtle, became palpable. But the effort was still there. There was still a part of him that insisted on believing. And a part of her that didn't know whether to give up or ask for help. They were trapped in a place where love and custom blurred. Where loyalty and inertia seemed to carry equal weight. Where no one knew exactly where he had begun to lose himself. But they both felt that something, silent and irreversible, was about to break. And deep down, somewhere very intimate, they knew that nothing would ever be the same again. And it was at that exact point, between doubt and fear, that time began to take its toll on everything that had been ignored. Everything that had been left unsaid. Everything that had been swept under the rug. And what was about to happen would forever change the meaning of love they thought they knew. It was an ordinary morning when everything fell apart. Daniel had woken up early, as usual, put on his favorite blue shirt, and made a more elaborate coffee than usual. It was Saturday, the sun filtered lazily through the window, and the tranquility of the house gave a false sense of peace. Emily had said she would be out for the day, attending an educational event with some schoolmates. Their goodbye was quick, with a hurried kiss and an excuse about the time. He stood at the door, watching her car disappear around the bend, feeling a slight sense of unease he couldn't name. He went back inside and tried to occupy his mind with pending tasks, but something didn't fit. And when unease turns to restlessness, sometimes instinct speaks louder than reason. Without much in the way of plans, he grabbed his car keys and left. It wasn't the first time he'd felt that pang in his stomach, but he always chose to ignore it. Not today. He drove slowly, the radio off, his thoughts racing. As he approached the venue she'd mentioned, he saw the parking lot was nearly empty. The streets were quiet, no sign of commotion. He waited a few minutes, leaning against the steering wheel, until something in his mind whispered that there was no point in pretending anymore. She wasn't there. And he knew it. Overcome by a painful lucidity, Daniel walked a few nearby streets, trying to find something to explain that absence. Just as he was about to give up, a discreet movement caught his attention. Across the avenue, an elegant, mirrored building welcomed luxury cars and well-dressed couples. A discreet sign advertised a private event. He parked his car, got out, and crossed the street with hesitant steps. The receptionist didn't ask many questions. Emily's name was on the list. Daniel's, of course, wasn't. He entered. The room was spacious, decorated with warm lights, ambient music, clinking glasses, restrained laughter, and expensive clothes. But none of this prepared him for what he saw at the end of the dance floor. She was dancing. Beautiful, free, light, as if there was no weight on her heart. And she wasn't dancing alone. The man beside her was tall, confident, and held her waist with practiced intimacy. They both smiled as if they'd experienced this scene 1,000 times. As if it were normal. As if she had no home, no husband, no history outside of that room. Daniel stopped. You didn't move a muscle. The pain was as silent as the gasp for air. It was like being inside your own body and, at the same time, outside, watching the destruction of everything you believed to be true. Emily didn't see him. Or she saw him, and chose not to. But he saw him. Every detail. Every touch. Every trace of betrayal framed by indifference. He left without making a scene. He didn't scream, didn't justify himself. There was nothing more to say. The scene spoke for itself. He drove home in an automatic, his eyes dry, his chest congested. That was the worst part, when the pain is still so fresh it can't even find tears to shed. The next day, she left the note on the table. I'm no longer part of this. She wrote slowly, as if signing her own freedom. She closed the door without knocking, with the dignity of someone who loved until the end and chose not to be destroyed by someone who didn't know how to value her. Emily returned late that afternoon and found the house intact but empty. She read the note in silence, not understanding what had happened. She looked for him, called, texted. No answer. Only then did she realize that everything that was once certain was now absent. The first week was one of confusion. The second, of denial. The third, of despair. Emily tried every way possible to contact him. She persisted. She cried. She showed up at his work door, but he didn't see her. She sent letters, gifts, and recordings asking for forgiveness. There was no response. Her lover, in turn, soon revealed his true intentions. When she hinted at something more serious, he was clear, he didn't want a commitment, he never promised anything. He said he enjoyed the light-heartedness of their life, the escapades, the freedom. When she cried, he fell silent. Then he disappeared. And that's when everything truly fell apart. Emily found herself alone. Abandoned by the one who swore she would be there. Without the husband who loved her, without the lover who deceived her. She tried to return to what she had, but she was no longer welcome. She began to relive every detail of the last few months with a new weight. Daniel's gaze at their last dinners. The silence. The unasked questions. The declined invitations. Everything began to make sense now. Love had been irreparably wounded. And she had been responsible. After weeks of pain, she managed to speak to him. A call. He answered. His voice was calm, restrained. She cried. She said she'd made a mistake, that she'd lost herself, that she didn't know how she'd gotten there. She asked for forgiveness. She said she remembered their first coffee, the notes, the lazy Sundays, his hands gently touching her face. He listened to it all. In silence. And when she finished, he spoke. He said he forgave. Because carrying resentment only imprisons the one who was hurt. But forgiving wasn't the same as coming back. That now there was someone beside him who looked at him the way she no longer did. That love can survive a lot, but it can't survive neglect. And that, above all, he had learned to love himself. The silence on the other end of the line was like a sentence. She tried to respond, but there was no more argument. He had already moved on. And she finally understood the true meaning of what she had lost. Not just a husband. But a home. A friend. A love that, while not perfect, was sincere. And she would carry this loss with her like a living scar. Because some mistakes demand forgiveness, but others teach. And in that moment, all that remained for her was to learn. Because while Daniel discovered peace in another woman's eyes, Emily learned, too late, the value of something that should never have been jeopardized. She continued with the emptiness of choices. He, with the serenity of someone who has learned to choose themselves. The sentence seemed like a full stop, but in reality it was just the beginning of a new chapter. Daniel found himself again, little by little, like someone relearning to walk after an accident. At first, he wondered if he was ready, if he was still capable of trusting, of loving, of making room for someone again. But he didn't push it. He let life, in its silent wisdom, heal the scars. He changed some habits, began to take better care of himself, went back to walking in the morning as he had in his youth, rediscovered the pleasure of simple things, and, one random afternoon, met someone who didn't make extravagant promises, but offered presence. And that was what made the difference. She was a woman with a calm laugh, a steady gaze, and a lightness in her gestures. She didn't ask too many questions, didn't try to take up space, she was simply there, with a kind of love that required no proof, only mutual surrender. This new relationship didn't begin with explosions, but with slow conversations, respect built in silence, trust cultivated day after day. Daniel didn't need to forget what he'd experienced, nor erase the pain he felt, but he learned not to let it frame his future. When he held his new partner's hand, he didn't feel the weight of comparison, but gratitude for finally finding someone who knew the value of being and staying. It wasn't about replacing someone, but about understanding that life offers new possibilities when we allow ourselves to move on. Emily, for her part, sank into remorse over time. The first few weeks were a struggle, with herself, with reality, with what she had lost. She tried to move on as if nothing had happened, but her conscience followed her around every corner, in the empty spaces of the house, in the memories that surfaced without warning. Daniel's absence was like a ghost that haunted the most ordinary moments. Going to the grocery store and not choosing his favorite coffee, waking up and not finding his slippers on the left side of the bed, returning home and no longer hearing the sound of his keys in the door. Everything screamed what she had missed. By the time she reached out to her former lover, it was too late. He had moved on with his life with the same indifference with which he had left her. There was no going back, no apology, no regret, just a void. She persisted, sought answers, tried to maintain some kind of connection, but received only silence. Gradually, she realized she had been just another distraction in a life of convenience. It wasn't about her, never had been. And that hurt more than the abandonment. Work didn't fulfill her as it once did either. School now felt cold, the classes repetitive, the students distant. The friends with whom she'd once shared coffee and smiles began to drift away, some discreetly, others with cutting words. "You had everything," she heard from a colleague in a moment of carelessness. And it was true. You did. And she traded it for a seemingly bottomless emptiness. She tried therapy, sought new environments, immersed herself in courses and groups, but in none of them did she find the feeling she'd once felt when she'd come home and see Daniel waiting on the couch with a book open on his lap. The silence was now deafening. Time, relentless, didn't wait for her to rise. It simply passed. Her face lost its shine, her smile became an effort, and her eyes carried the weight of someone who saw the value of things too late. There were still moments when she tried to justify her choice, telling herself she was confused, that she needed to rediscover herself, but these were empty excuses. Deep down, she knew she had been selfish. That she had betrayed more than her marriage, betrayed the loyalty, the security, the love of someone who had always been there, even when she herself didn't know if she deserved it. Daniel passed her by chance one day. It was quick, at a random street intersection. He saw her first. She was walking with her head down, distracted, carrying bags and a lost look in her eyes. When she recognized him, she stopped. Her eyes filled with tears, but she said nothing. He waved with a slight, almost imperceptible smile and continued on his way. That gesture, so small, carried the immensity of everything that had changed. It was the end of a cycle. And she understood. There would never be a turning back. Because some mistakes can't be fixed, they only teach us. Some time later, Daniel got married. A simple ceremony, among close friends, without ostentation. There were no luxuries, but there was peace. He cried during the vows. Not out of pain, but out of gratitude. For having survived the chaos and found shelter in another heart. Emily learned about the wedding through social media. She looked at each photo with dry eyes and a wet soul. She didn't comment, she didn't like. She simply observed silently what could have become of her, had she made different choices. Today, she lives alone. She has a small apartment, few friends, and a life marked by absences. When she sits down to dinner, she still sets 2 plates. An old habit she hasn't been able to break. She keeps a box of letters she never sent, of apologies she never read aloud. She knows she lost, and she knows why. Her greatest pain isn't being alone, but knowing she caused the loneliness of someone who only wanted to love her. Daniel, on the other hand, learned that true love doesn't need to be shouted. That it shows itself in the details, in respect, in constancy. He learned that pain doesn't kill, it transforms. And that no matter what is taken from you, as long as you have dignity, you still have everything. He hasn't forgotten the past, but he uses it as a guide to never again accept less than he deserves. And today, when he looks back, he doesn't feel anger. He feels relief. Because life rewarded him not for being perfect, but for being loyal, even when it wasn't reciprocated. Comment below with your thoughts on this story and your opinion on the characters' fates. Do you agree with each character's ending? Leave a comment, we'd love to hear your take on this real and intense plot. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to see more stories like this, powerful, moving, and ones that make us reflect on our choices. The reflection this story leaves is simple and devastating. Betrayal doesn't just destroy relationships, it devastates trust, admiration, and complicity. It kills what's most pure between 2 people, the feeling of being chosen, loved, and respected. Cheating is abandoning a love without warning, it's breaking a silent agreement of mutual care. And even if forgiveness exists, the pain it causes can forever change the path of the betrayed. This channel does not condone any kind of betrayal. Here, we show, through fiction, the real consequences of bad choices. May this story serve as a warning to those who think love is disposable. Because when you throw away someone you only wanted to love, what you lose is never coming back.